You're focusing on the wrong training zone for your MMA conditioning. Yes, no more 5 a.m. wake-ups to hit the roads, and no more long, boring cardio sessions. I've got something better for you. And it's all based on science and real-world application with professional athletes such as pro boxers, MMA athletes, grapplers, Premier League soccer players, rugby players, and many, many more. So I'm not going to make you wait. Let's just get straight into it because I'm chomping at the bit to share this with you. And obviously, I've got all my notes here on my computer. Right now, we have Zone 2 as the golden child within the conditioning world. And it's been promoted by various health influencers and podcasters, or I should say being rammed down your throat by various podcasters and influencers for health and longevity purpose. Sure, not a bad option for general health, and if you're just training for general health, you can do pretty much anything and it's going to be better than what most people are doing. But the consequences of this rhetoric is that it makes its way into the athletic training world like combat sports. But to be fair, Zone 2 rhetoric has been in combat sports much longer than the current trend. It's just blowing up much bigger now. Regardless, here's why Zone 2 may not be what you need. And after I go through these, I'm going to give you everything step by step with how you can properly do your conditioning and get more out of it. So first thing with Zone 2, you're primarily recruiting type 1 muscle fibers. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not such a negative adaptation because you're likely doing other forms of speed power-based training. But if you're doing crazy volumes of Zone 2 training, then you might have some kind of negative effect in terms of muscle fiber type and the adaptations you're getting from it. Number 2, it takes a lot of time, and you need that time and energy to cover all aspects of these complex sports. Think about an MMA training schedule where you're having to cover grappling, striking, piecing it together, sparring, and you're doing these every day of the week most of the time, or if you have the schedule, you're doing these multiple times a day. Trying to fit in 60-minute runs 3 times a week on top of that is going to be near impossible. And if you were going to fit, say, 3 60-minute runs a week, wouldn't it make more sense to do that using your skill work so you can get more technical training in versus taking that time away? Which brings me to my third point. If you're training enough combat sports, you're likely getting enough low intensity stimulus anyway. Adding more is potentially giving you diminishing returns as it takes away time you could be training and targeting other qualities. The fourth one, you need a lot of volume to continue improving aerobic capacity, also known as VO2 max. That's why you have endurance athletes having huge mileage throughout a training week so they can develop this base. But along with this huge mileage and a lot of time spent, you have a lot of repetitive movement done, and this kind of volume may potentially start to lead to niggles and pains. And the fifth reason why Zone 2 might not be what you need is the idea that central function, which is the heart delivering oxygen, may not be as much of a limiting factor to sports performance compared to the peripheral factors, which are at the muscular level, being able to use the oxygen. Since Zone 2 training biases central adaptations at the heart, and with VO2 max being mostly influenced by delivery, you may be pushing for changes that don't help you on the mat, in the ring, or in the cage. So let's expand on that. Here's why hitting the roads to improve oxygen delivery and VO2 max may not be the best use of your time. I'm gonna throw this graph up right here for you, and it is a screenshot. It is taken from our first conditioning mentorship, which actually sold out before the deadline. So if you want to not miss the next cohort, which starts around June, sign up for the waitlist, it'll be in the description. Now I have to credit Dr. Andrew Usher because he's presenting a masterclass in there, and this is taken from one of his presentations in there. So full credit for him being a mentor and a huge influence on me regarding this. But with this picture, I'm gonna show you. It shows an incremental treadmill test to measure VO2 max. And the green line on this graph is the heart rate. So you see that steadily climbing. You see the red and the yellow lines. These are the rectus femoris muscles, the left and right muscles. So that will be in your quads. And that's measuring muscle oxygen saturation. Where the mouse is on this image, that is where VO2 max occurred for this athlete. Now, as you can see, there is plenty left in the tank after this athlete reached VO2 max. Muscle oxygen saturation only really starts to plummet once we get to that point. So it is likely that VO2 max is a relatively poor indicator of performance. Secondly, if we look at VO2 max data from various combat sports, it's not that high. Most fighters sit between 45 to 60 milliliters per kg per minute, and that is from BJJ through to wrestling, through to judo, boxing, and MMA, and we're talking at the international and elite level as well. Now, considering that elite endurance athletes have VO2 maxes of about 70 plus, you can see combat athletes are well below this. We can also look at this paper here, and it shows that a VO2 max in the range that low combat athletes are, is considered relatively low in levels 1 and 2. All of this to say, focusing on VO2 max or zone 2 training probably isn't your best option. Now there are some caveats to this and I'll get to that at the end of this video. But then what is a better use of your time for your conditioning? In my opinion, and the opinion of many other coaches in this area, peripherally biasing your conditioning is likely a better option. Now what the fuck does this even mean? It means improving your muscles' ability to do work, and the most time efficient and effective way of doing this is sprint interval training. We can actually look at a new paper by Sindre Molman, hopefully I said that right, and their colleagues, titled Effects of Exercise Training on Mitochondrial and Capillary Growth in Human Skeletal Muscle. And what they did is they pulled a bunch of papers together in their review, and they wanted to compare endurance training, high intensity training, and sprint interval training on the effects of mitochondrial capillary growth and VO2 max. How they classed it was endurance training was below the second ventilatory threshold, or below 4 millimoles of lactate, or below 87% of max heart rate or VO2 max, or below 75% of max power. High intensity training was above these thresholds, and then sprint interval training was maximal or near maximal efforts with a duration of 4 to 90 seconds with a greater than 1-to-1 recovery. So let me show you some cool graphs from this paper. In this first one, it shows the percent of mitochondrial content and its change based on the training intervention. So what they found was all exercise intensities led to similar increases in mitochondrial content. But sprint interval training was 2.3 times more efficient than high intensity training and 3.9 times more efficient than endurance training. Now, one of the arguments against this is that sprint interval training doesn't significantly increase mitochondrial content or even just general quote unquote fitness after the first few weeks, which the study did find. And you can see on this graph here that it starts to cap off with the orange triangles starting to level out while everything else is still going up. But we have to remember that with sprint interval training studies, the protocol remains constant throughout the entire study. So if it's a 5-week study, 10-week study, whatever it is, and whatever protocol they decided to pick, that is being used throughout the entire time. So there's no change. So if you think about if you're going to the gym and you're squatting 100 kilos for 5 reps, and you're doing that same thing every time, you know you're not going to get stronger once you get to a certain point and you adapt to that weight. Same thing with sprint intervals. You can adapt to the intervals and the work to rest ratios, and you need to change those, which I'm going to cover in a bit. But most interestingly, I'm going to show you in this graph right here, well-trained athletes didn't show any change in mitochondrial content when expressed per hour of training after endurance training and high intensity training, but not for sprint interval training. So if you're well trained, you need that intensity to be able to kickstart that mitochondrial change. Now, also in Dr. Andrew Usher and Dr. John Babry's paper in Professional Boxing, they found huge changes in mitochondrial function just after 3 weeks of sprint interval training in professional boxers. So if you have a well-trained base under you, you're going to need some kind of intensity to keep pushing those peripheral adaptations. Adding more of this low intensity work in the zone 2 that we talked about in the beginning, sure, it might help you improve your VO2 max and the central function delivery, but it might not be pushing your peripheral function as well. Now that covers some of the peripheral adaptations with those graphs. Now, one of the arguments against sprint interval training being used longer than say a 4-week period or maybe a short fight camp period is that you don't improve your VO2 max very well. One of the arguments is VO2 max caps out after 3 or 4 weeks, which is true. It's shown in studies like the Tabata study. It's shown in studies like this graph here from Yamagishi and Babry in 2017, where VO2 max after about 3 weeks kind of hit a peak and it doesn't improve anymore from that sprint interval. If we come back to our Sindre and Molman paper, they found that sprint interval training was 2.9 times more efficient than high intensity training and 4.9 times more efficient than endurance training for improving VO2 max per hour trained. As you can see on these graphs I'm going to show you here. What if VO2 max caps out quickly? Doesn't that mean we need to go back to zone 2 type training to be able to push this further? Not so fast. As shown earlier, there's plenty more left in the tank once VO2 max is reached in an incremental treadmill test. Another example from Yamagishi and the Babry study is this graph, and it shows time to exhaustion. If you remember, at the 3-week mark, VO2 max capped out. It did not increase any further for the following 6 weeks. But you'll see here in the time to exhaustion, it continued to increase all the way to 9 weeks using the same sprint interval protocol. So who cares if VO2 max didn't go up? The performance improved. This is what matters. We're able to work harder, longer, and faster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of my data. Not from a VO2 max test, because I ain't doing that. I did some baseline sprint interval tests, ones that we recommend in the conditioning mentorship. And I just want to show you how this looks in practice. So There should be some video rolling over top at some point of me actually doing this test. It's brutal. It is 2 sets of 30 seconds on with 60 seconds rest. Sounds easy, you know, just 30 seconds of work, 1 minute of total work. But this is balls out. This is so intense that afterwards you're gonna be rolling on the floor. Essentially, I'm not gonna say in pain, but my legs were in pain just from how pumped they were from this on the bike. And this is my heart rate graph here as well, which I'm showing you from that 30 on, 60 off. Now, that was my 2 sprints there. You can kind of see the 2 peaks. Ideally, my heart rate should be shaped a little more like this graph, where you can see a big difference in the shape of that graph. You see these very steep climbs in heart rate, and then you see these very sharp drops. This is the kind of shape you're looking for in your sprint interval training. And it indicates how well you can get in and out of, I'm just gonna call it quote unquote hard work. How well you can get into these high heart rate zones and come back down. Now, the faster you can get to near maximal heart rates and the faster you can get out of it, the better your conditioning is gonna be. And it's not about just trying to cover all the different zones. We're looking at how heart rate responds to exercise. And we can do the same thing for the competition data. I'm not gonna show you any of that at the moment because I just wanna keep this to this and make this a little more simple. We can layer more data points on top of this if you have it, such as NAERS, which is the muscle oxygenation data, and external power maybe from the bike you're using or whatever equipment you're using. But heart rate will generally follow an inverse trend of muscle oxygenation data. So if you just have heart rate, you can use just heart rate. And it's not just about the total beats. Typically we're told heart rate recovery. If your heart rate recovers 20 beats in the minute, you might need to do extra aerobic work. If it's 40 beats, that's good. If it's 50 beats, that's really good. But as I mentioned, it's not the total beats, it's the quality of the heart rate recovery. And on the way up, it's how quickly it can kick in most of the time. So let's take a deeper look. Here's my heart rate kinetics data for the first sprint. I'm popping it up here. It's likely I needed more resistance on the bike, but my brakes have worn out on this thing and I need to get myself a Rogue Gecko bike essentially. So Rogue, sponsor me please, thank you. Now, what you'll see on this is a black line, and that is the mathematical model for the ideal quote unquote heart rate fit. The green dots represent the fast kinetics and the red dots are the slow kinetics. Ideally, we'd be all green on there, but being a complex organism as we are humans, it's not gonna happen. But what we do want to see is a tight hugging to the line, which my data shows, which isn't too bad for someone who is a recreational athlete. What I probably want to dial in is having my heart rate kick in earlier. So as you can see at the beginning of the graph, you can see a cluster of red dots. Ideally, that would be green. And remember that, because I'm gonna come back to that when we talk about intervals. Moving on to the recovery phase of the first sprint, it's not too great. We see the same issue, really. We see a clustering of red dots in the beginning. Ideally, that would be green because we want the recovery phase to kick in faster and not have that lag. And then obviously at the end we have that little inflection, probably because I'm thinking about doing the next rep when I'm already gassed. So if we get to the second sprint, the second 30 seconds, and we look at the on kinetics, which is the working interval, same thing, cluster of red dots in the beginning and even near the end as well. We probably want to change those to green. And then same thing with the off, a much better recovery phase on the second sprint, likely because, you know, once you finish something, you can kind of fully relax. So that's probably why we have a better slope there. But again, we want those green dots in the beginning to facilitate a faster recovery near the top, but pretty close to the line, which is good. No real outliers far outside the line, which is where conditioning can really take a hit. So what does this inform? What does having data like this mean for conditioning? Well, my likely sprint protocol to perform 2 to 3 times a week with this is something like 10 by 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. And the reason we're doing that was we've gone from 30 seconds on, 60 seconds off. We've shortened that work interval, and by shortening the work interval, we're gonna force faster on kinetics. So that means we can try shift some of those red to green. And the shorter rest interval from 60 seconds to 10 seconds in this instance will force faster recovery kinetics. So again, we can hopefully turn those red dots to green dots. Then it's just monitoring weekly and making changes as needed. Do we need to extend the work interval to try and maintain peak power longer? And that means we need to also extend the rest interval, and we can kind of move back and forth in there. Ideally, I'd have power data to make a more informed conditioning prescription, but you don't need it, and Rogue needs to sponsor me. Now, this isn't to discount other forms of training. You really have to be a different breed to be able to do something like this 2 to 3 times a week, year round. It is damn hard. But if you have aspirations of going pro in your combat sports, you're already a different breed, and you can handle this. And if you can't, you should learn to handle this, because you're gonna have to go to dark places anyway. Plus, it will give you more time and energy for your technical training. So an approach like this, for someone who's trying to go pro and is all in, this is a good idea. But for the rest of you who are recreational competitors or practitioners, you can use other peripherally based conditioning means, such as long and short intervals with resisted exercise. Now, my podcast with Ed Baker, pop the screenshot up here, check that out on the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast channel. We dove into this about his super circuits that he uses, which is exactly this. And he has super circuits for out of camp, and then he has super circuits with in camp. And that's all peripherally based conditioning done in a circuit fashion. It's basically body weight exercises and some others, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, for 6 of them in a rhythmic fashion. And you can use other exercises, medicine ball throws, you can use battle ropes, deep end range, extensive plyometrics, think like jumping on the spot and like the bottom portion of a squat, various plyometrics, and then also you can mix these with specific modalities like hitting the heavy bag as an example. You could use something like that as more of your quote unquote out of camp training, and then you can use your sprint intervals as you're getting close, maybe 12 weeks out from a fight as an example. If you're not able to get as much technical training done, for example, you're only training 3 times a week in your combat sport and you can't get to any more classes for whatever reason, then approaches like maximal aerobic speed can give you the centrally biased adaptations with some peripheral. So if you're not familiar, maximal aerobic speed is essentially individualizing your conditioning based on the fastest speed that occurs during VO2 max. So a very simple test is to do like a 6-minute run, bike, or row. You take the distance you covered, you divide that by the time in seconds, which is 360. That will give you a number. For example, it might give you 4. That corresponds to 4 meters per second. So then when you're designing intervals as part of your mass, you're going to take that meters per second number, multiply it by the seconds of the interval, and that'll give you the distance to cover. Hopefully that made sense. For example, if you're doing a 15-second interval with a 4 meters per second mass, I cannot do the math live on this, so I'm not even going to do the math, but you just multiply 4 by 15 as an example. Now you can actually make these mass intervals more peripheral by the modality you choose and how you perform them. For example, if you were doing 15 or 20 second mass intervals and you're doing them on the rower, probably going to be more centrally biased. If you did them running, but you did it with a change of direction, almost like a shuttle run, so you take the total distance and you just basically go out and back, you have to account a little bit of time for the turn. It's going to become more demanding muscularly, and therefore it becomes more peripherally biased. You can also increase the speed by, instead of going 100% mass, you can go 110% or 120% to make it even faster. So there are ways to peripherally bias some of that maximal aerobic speed conditioning. To bring it all back, this doesn't discount zone 2 training either. If you have a high resting heart rate, so we're talking typically, if you have like a high resting heart rate like above 60, there's going to be some issues regardless, but typically you're looking at a resting heart rate somewhat below 50. Now if it's above that, or you're coming back from injury or sickness or time off, whatever it is, then a few weeks of relatively easy zone 2 training is probably ideal. Also, if you just enjoy going for long runs, that's kind of like your outlet outside of combat sports. You can still use a zone 2 approach to your combat sports conditioning. Just in my opinion, if you are looking to really move the needle and your #1 goal is to make it pro and have the best performances you can as a combat athlete, then I would try other modalities such as a sprint interval training. So hopefully this video made sense to you. Hopefully I was able to provide enough information for you. I will say, make sure you check out this video as well on lactic acid, which doesn't exist, that is lactate. So make sure you check out that video as well, because it's going to cover some more, I could say, conditioning myths around combat sports conditioning. Also, you need to check the description because the waitlist for the conditioning mentorship is there. I'll try post it in the comments too if I remember, and I'll see you in the next video.